have to tell their own child that they wouldn't be receiving any inheritance. But after years of watching my daughter treat her family like an ATM while showing no respect, gratitude, or basic human decency toward the people who loved and supported her through everything, I finally reached the breaking point that forced me to make one of the most painful decisions of my life. What happened last month when I told my 32-year-old daughter that she wouldn't be getting a single penny from my estate was the culmination of decades of entitled behavior, manipulation, and outright cruelty that I should have addressed years ago. But sometimes it takes a truly shocking betrayal to open your eyes to patterns you've been making excuses for far too long. My name is Margaret. I'm 67 years old. And I've spent the last 3 decades building a successful accounting practice while raising 2 children, mostly on my own, after my husband passed away when our kids were still in elementary school. I worked 70-hour weeks for years to ensure my daughter Jessica and my son Michael had everything they needed: good schools, college educations, stable housing, and all the opportunities I'd never had growing up in a working-class family, where money was always tight and higher education seemed like an impossible dream. I thought I was giving them the foundation for successful, grateful lives, but with Jessica, all my sacrifices and support seemed to create the opposite effect from the time Jessica was a teenager. She demonstrated a sense of entitlement and lack of appreciation that concerned me, but that I kept hoping she'd outgrow as she matured and began to understand the value of hard work and family sacrifice. She expected expensive clothes, the latest electronics, a car for her 16th birthday, and college tuition payments, without any acknowledgement of the financial strain these things put on our family, or any gratitude for the opportunities she was receiving when her friends' parents couldn't afford similar luxuries. Jessica would make cruel comments about how poor their families were and how lucky she was to have a mother who understood what was important in teen life. Jessica's attitude toward money and family obligations became even more problematic during her college years, when she chose an expensive private university over the excellent state schools that would have provided a quality education, and at a fraction of the cost. She insisted that attending a prestigious private college was necessary for her career goals. And she made it clear that she expected me to pay for her choice, regardless of the financial impact on my retirement savings or her younger brother's future educational needs. When I tried to discuss more affordable options, Jessica accused me of not believing in her potential and threatened to cut off contact if I didn't support her dreams. Against my better judgment, I took out a second mortgage on my house and used most of my retirement savings to pay for Jessica's expensive education, hoping that the investment would help her build a successful career and that she'd eventually appreciate the sacrifices I'd made for her future. Instead, Jessica treated my financial support as something she was entitled to rather than a gift that required gratitude and responsibility. And she continued to make demands for additional money throughout her college years without any acknowledgement of the hardship these requests created. After graduation, Jessica moved to New York City to pursue a career in marketing. And the financial demands only increased as she expected me to subsidize her expensive apartment. Social life and professional wardrobe until she could establish herself in her chosen field. She argued that supporting her during this transition period was part of my parental obligations, and that cutting off financial assistance would jeopardize everything we'd worked together to achieve. Pro her education, the emotional manipulation, and guilt trips were constant. And I found myself sending hundreds of dollars every month to cover expenses that Jessica considered essential, but that seemed more like lifestyle choices than legitimate needs. Meanwhile, my son Michael took a completely different approach to his education and early career, choosing a state university that allowed him to graduate debt-free. Working part-time jobs throughout college to cover his personal expenses and expressing genuine gratitude for the support I was able to provide without making demands for additional assistance. The contrast between my children's approaches to money, family, and personal responsibility became increasingly stark as they both entered their 20s. And I started to realize that my different treatment of their financial needs might have contributed to Jessica's entitled attitudes and expectations. If you've ever been a parent trying to balance supporting your children with teaching them responsibility and gratitude, you probably understand how difficult it can be to know when you're helping and when you're enabling, especially when emotional manipulation and guilt trips are involved in every conversation about money and support. The pattern of Jessica's financial dependence and emotional manipulation continued throughout her 20s, with increasingly expensive requests, accompanied by increasingly sophisticated arguments about why her mother should be responsible for funding her lifestyle choices. When she wanted to move to a more expensive apartment, she argued that my success in business meant I could afford to help her live in a safer neighborhood. When she wanted to take expensive vacations, she claimed that the stress of her demanding job required relaxation opportunities that she couldn't afford on her entry-level salary. When she wanted to buy expensive clothes and accessories, she insisted that professional appearance was crucial for career advancement and that my investment in her wardrobe would pay dividends in her future earning potential. Each request was accompanied by emotional manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for questioning her needs or selfish for considering my own financial security. Jessica had perfected the art of making me feel like a bad mother whenever I hesitated to provide financial support. And she would punish any resistance with periods of reduced contact or outright hostility that made family gatherings tense and uncomfortable for everyone involved. She seemed to understand that my love for her and my desire to maintain our relationship gave her tremendous power to extract money and support through emotional blackmail. The situation became even more problematic when Jessica got married 5 years ago to a man named Brad, who shared her entitled attitudes and expensive tastes, but had even less motivation to work hard or take responsibility for his own financial security. Instead of Jessica's marriage reducing the financial demands on me, Brad's presence in her life actually increased the pressure for support as they combined their expensive lifestyle preferences and began making plans that required substantial financial backing from family members who had more established careers and savings. Jessica and Brad's wedding was the first major indication of how out of control their financial expectations had become. With demands for a ceremony and reception that would have cost more than many people make in a year. When I explained that my budget for contributing to their wedding was limited, Jessica had a complete meltdown about how I was ruining the most important day of her life and how other mothers would do. Anything to make their daughters' dreams come true. The guilt trips and emotional manipulation reached new heights. And I ultimately spent far more on their wedding than I could afford just to avoid the ongoing drama and accusations that I didn't love Em. Why daughter enough to support her happiness after the wedding? The requests for financial support continued to escalate as Jessica and Brad made lifestyle and career decisions based on the assumption that family money would always be available to Cove. Are the gaps between their income and their expenses? They bought an expensive house they couldn't afford, took luxury vacations funded by credit cards they couldn't pay off, and generally lived like people with trust funds rather than young professionals who needed to build their careers and manage their finances responsibly. When their overspending inevitably created financial crises, Jessica would call me in tears with sob stories about how they were facing eviction, car repossession, or credit card lawsuits that would destroy their future unless I provided emergency assistance. These crisis situations always came with tight deadlines and emotional pressure that made it difficult to evaluate whether the emergencies were legitimate or manufactured to create urgency around my financial support. The most frustrating aspect of Jessica's constant financial demands was her complete lack of appreciation for the help she received and her failure to make any changes in her behavior or spending patterns that would prevent future crises. Every emergency loan or gift was treated as something she deserved rather than a sacrifice I was making. And she would often be planning new expenditures before she'd even finished receiving assistance. For current financial problems, there was never any acknowledgement of the impact these requests had on my own financial security or any recognition that my support was enabling irresponsible behavior. Rather than helping her build a stable foundation for the future, the contrast between Jessica's attitude toward family support and her brother Michael's approach became even more pronounced as they both entered their 30s and started their own families. Michael and his wife both worked hard to establish careers and build savings before having children, and when they did need assistance, like help with a down payment on their first house or support during parental leave, they approached the conversation with gratitude, realistic expectations, and clear plans for how they would manage their finances going forward. Their requests were occasional, reasonable, and accompanied by genuine appreciation that made me happy to help when I could. Jessica's demands, on the other hand, were constant, unreasonable, and accompanied by manipulation and entitlement that made every conversation about money stressful and unpleasant. She seemed to view my financial support as an unlimited resource that existed solely for her benefit. and she became increasingly angry and hostile when I suggested that she might need to adjust her style or expectations to match her actual income and circumstances. The breaking point that led to my decision to cut Jessica out of my will came 6 months ago during what should have been a pleasant family gathering for my grandson's birthday party. Michael and his family had organized a small celebration at their house, and I was looking forward to spending time with my grandchildren and enjoying a relaxed afternoon with family. Jessica and Brad attended, but their behavior throughout the party was so inappropriate and hurtful that it opened my eyes to patterns of cruelty and manipulation that I'd been making excuses for far too long. The first incident happened when Jessica made cruel comments about the modest decorations and simple birthday cake that Michael's wife had prepared for the party, loudly comparing it to the elaborate celebrations that she would organize when she had more money, and criticizing the cheap approach that her brother's family had taken for their son's special day. Her comments were clearly designed to make Michael and his wife feel inadequate and embarrassed, and they cast a shadow over what should have been a joyful celebration of a child's birthday. But Jessica's behavior became even worse when she discovered that I had given Michael's family a substantial check to help with unexpected medical expenses they'd been facing due to their son's recent surgery. Instead of showing concern for her nephew's health or appreciation for her brother's responsible approach to managing a family crisis, Jessica flew into a rage about how unfair it was that Michael was receiving financial support while he was struggling to pay her own bills and maintain her lifestyle. The confrontation that followed was one of the most painful and eye-opening experiences of my life as a parent. Jessica accused me of playing favorites, claimed that Michael had manipulated me into giving him money that should have been available to help her, and demanded that I provide her with an equal amount immediately to compensate for the unfair support I'd given to her brother. When I tried to explain that Michael's situation involved legitimate medical expenses for a child, while her financial problems were the result of lifestyle choices and overspending, Jessica became even more angry and abusive. What shocked me most was Jessica's complete lack of concern for her nephew's medical situation and her inability to understand why emergency medical expenses for a child might be different from her own financial problems caused by overspending on luxury items and lifestyle choices she couldn't afford. She seemed genuinely angry that her brother's family crisis had interfered with her own access to family financial support. And she made it clear that she viewed her nephew's medical needs as competition for resources that she felt entitled to receive. But the most devastating part of the confrontation came when Jessica started attacking Michael's character and parenting in front of his young children, making cruel comments about how he was a failure who couldn't provide for his family without help from his mother, and suggesting that his children would grow up to be as pathetic and dependent as their father. The cruelty and vindictiveness of these attacks, delivered in front of confused and frightened grandchildren who didn't understand why their aunt was being so mean, finally showed me the true nature of the person my daughter had become. Michael's Wife started crying and took the children to another room to protect them from Jessica's verbal assault, while Michael himself remained remarkably calm and dignified despite the personal attacks and publicly humiliation his sister was inflicting on him. The contrast between Jessica's cruel, selfish behavior and Michael's mature response to being attacked in his own home in front of his children during his son's birthday party crystallized everything that was wrong with the dynamic I'd allowed to develop in our family. I realized that by constantly bailing Jessica out of financial problems and accepting her emotional manipulation as normal family behavior, I had enabled her to become someone who was cruel, selfish, and completely unable to show basic human decency toward the people who loved her. My financial support hadn't helped her build a better life. It had funded a lifestyle of entitlement and cruelty that was harmful to everyone around her, including her own family members. The final straw came when Jessica demanded that I immediately write her a check to make up for the medical assistance I'd given to Michael, and when I refused, she threatened to cut off contact with me and prevent me from seeing any future grandchildren she may have. The fact that she was willing to use access to potential grandchildren as leverage in a financial negotiation showed me that she viewed family relationships as transactional arrangements rather than bonds of love and mutual support. I told Jessica that the conversation was over and that she needed to leave Michael's house immediately. But her response was to double down on her attacks and threats rather than recognizing how inappropriate her behavior had been. She stormed out of the party after making additional cruel comments about her brother's family and declaring that she was done with all of us until we started treating her with the respect and support she deserved. The drive home from that birthday party was one of the most emotionally difficult experiences I'd had since my husband's death, as I replayed decades of interactions with Jessica and finally acknowledged patterns of manipulation, cruelty, and entitlement that I'd been making excuses for because I loved her and wanted to believe she would eventually mature and develop empathy for other people. But watching her attack her brother's family during a child's birthday party, showing no concern for her nephew's medical situation, and demanding money as compensation for medical assistance given to a sick child, forced me to confront the reality that Jessica had become someone who was fundamentally selfish and cruel. I spent the next several weeks thinking about my relationship with Jessica and the impact that my financial support had on her behavior and development as a person. I consulted with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and financial codependency, and I had long conversations with Michael about the patterns of behavior we'd both observed and enabled over the years. These discussions helped me understand that my constant financial support had actually harmed Jessica by preventing her from experiencing the natural consequences of her choices, and by reinforcing her belief that other people existed to fund her lifestyle and absorb the costs of her poor decisions. The therapist helped me understand that Jessica's behavior at the birthday party wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a predictable escalation of patterns that had been developing for decades, and that continuing to provide financial support would only enable further cruelty and manipulation toward family members who deserved better treatment. She also helped me recognize that my fear of losing Jessica's love had made me complicit in her mistreatment of Michael and his family. And that truly loving both of my children required protecting Michael from Jessica's attacks and refusing to fund behavior that was harmful to our family. After extensive reflection and consultation with both mental health professionals and financial advisors, I made the decision to revise my will to remove Jessica as a beneficiary and to establish clear boundaries about financial support that would protect both my own retirement security and Michael's family from ongoing manipulation and abuse. I also decided to have a direct conversation with Jessica about these changes, giving her an opportunity to understand the consequences of her behavior and potentially make changes that could repair our relationship. The conversation where I told Jessica she wouldn't be receiving any inheritance was scheduled for a neutral location, a coffee shop near her office, where we could have privacy, but where the public setting would hopefully discourage either kind of emotional outburst that had characterized our previous difficult conversations. I had prepared carefully for the meeting, consulting with my therapist about how to present the information clearly while maintaining appropriate boundaries around Jessica's likely emotional manipulati and threats. Jessica arrived at the coffee shop expecting what she thought would be another opportunity to request financial assistance. And she had clearly prepared arguments about why she deserved help with recent expenses and why my previous refusal to provide emergency funding had been unfair and hurtful. She was completely unprepared for the conversation I was actually planning to have, and her shock when I explained the changes to my will was genuine and dramatic. I told Jessica that after decades of providing financial support that had been met with ingratitude, manipulation, and cruelty toward other family members, I had decided that she would not be receiving any inheritance when I passed away. I explained that Michael would inherit my estate because he had demonstrated the values of gratitude, responsibility, and family loyalty that I hoped to reward and continue through my legacy, while Jessica had demonstrated through her behavior that she viewed family relationships as opportunities for financial exploitation rather than bonds of love and mutual support. Jessica's reaction was exactly what I had expected based on her previous responses to any limits on financial support. But it was also more extreme and vindictive than I had prepared for. She immediately launched into accusations that Michael had manipulated me against her, that I was playing favorites based on gender discrimination, and that I was being cruel and unfair to punish her for having different financial needs and communication styles than her brother. The victim narrative and emotional manipulation were intense and sustained, designed to make me feel guilty for protecting myself and Michael's family from further financial and emotional abuse. When the manipulation tactics didn't work and I remained firm in my decision, Jessica escalated to threats and ultimatums that revealed the transactional nature of how she viewed our relationship. She threatened to cut off all contact with me to prevent me from having any relationship with future grandchildren. and to tell extended family members that I had been emotionally abusive and financially controlling throughout her life. She also threatened to contest my will and to pursue legal action that would tie up my estate and prevent Michael from receiving his inheritance. But the most revealing part of Jessica's response was her complete inability to show any self-reflection or acknowledgement that her own behavior might have influenced my decision. Instead of expressing any remorse for her treatment of Michael's family or recognition that her constant financial demands had been stressful and inappropriate. She focused entirely on attacking me for being unfair and discriminatory. There was no recognition that inheritance is a privilege rather than a right, and no understanding that her behavior toward family members had consequences beyond just getting her in trouble with her aim. The conversation ended with Jessica storming out of the coffee shop after making additional threats about legal action and family estrangement. But not before she made one final demand for immediate financial assistance to help her hire an attorney to contest my will. The fact that she was simultaneously threatening legal action and requesting money to fund that action perfectly encapsulated the entitled, manipulative mindset that had motivated my decision to protect my estate from her continued exploitation. The aftermath of telling Jessica about her disinheritance has been both liberating and heartbreaking, as I've had to accept that my relationship with one of my children is probably irreparable while also experiencing relief from the constant financial pressure and emotional manipulation that had dominated our interactions for decades. Jessica has followed through on her threats to cut off contact, and I haven't spoken to her in over 3 months. But this absence has actually been peaceful rather than painful, as I've realized how much stress and anxiety her constant demands and manipulation had been creating in my daily life. Michael and his family have been incredibly supportive throughout this process, expressing gratitude for the protection from Jessica's attacks and understanding about the difficult decision I had to make. They've also helped me process the guilt and sadness that came with acknowledging that one of my children had become someone who was fundamentally incompatible with the values and relationships I wanted to maintain in my later years. The legal threats that Jessica made have not materialized into actual action. Possibly because attorneys have explained to her that contesting a will based on claims of manipulation or incompetence requires substantial evidence and legal fees that she cannot afford without financial support from the family members she's threatening to sue. The irony of her needing family financial support to pursue legal action against the family has apparently not been lost on the legal professionals she's consulted. The financial relief of no longer providing constant emergency assistance to Jessica has allowed me to rebuild my retirement savings and to provide more meaningful support to Michael's family, including funding for the grandchildren's education and assistance with home improvements that will benefit the entire family. The contrast between supporting family members who are grateful and responsible versus enabling someone who views support as an entitlement has been striking and has reinforced the correctness of my decision. The experience of having to disinherit my own daughter has also connected me with other parents who have faced similar situations with entitled adult children who view family relationships as opportunities for financial exploitation rather than bonds of love and mutual support. These conversations have helped me understand that my situation is not unique and that many parents struggle with the balance between supporting their children and enabling destructive behavior. I've also learned about the importance of setting clear boundaries around financial support early in adult children's lives, rather than waiting until patterns of entitlement and manipulation become entrenched and destructive to other family relationships. The therapist I've been working with has helped me understand that my fear of losing Jessica's love had made me complicit in behavior that was ultimately harmful to everyone involved, including Jessica herself. The most important insight from this experience has been understanding that true love sometimes requires making decisions that feel harsh in the short term, but that protect everyone's long-term well-being and maintain important values and principles. By continuing to provide financial support to Jessica despite her cruel treatment of other family members, I was enabling behavior that was harmful to everyone and that prevented her from experiencing the natural consequences of her choices. The decision to tell Jessica she wouldn't receive any inheritance wasn't made in anger or as punishment for specific incidents, but rather as a natural consequence of her demonstrated values and priorities over decades of adult life. Inheritance is a privilege that reflects a parent's assessment of which children are most likely to use family resources in ways that honor family values and continue positive legacies. And Jessica's behavior toward family members made it clear that she didn't share or respect the values I hoped to pass on through my estate. 6 months after that painful conversation in the coffee shop, I remain confident that I made the right decision for my family and my own peace of mind. The absence of constant financial pressure and emotional manipulation has allowed me to enjoy relationships with Michael's family that are based on mutual love and respect rather than transactional arrangements and emergency crisis management. My relationship with my grandchildren has deepened as I've been able to focus on being a supportive, loving grandmother rather than someone who was constantly stressed about financial demands and family conflicts. Michael's children have benefited from having a grandmother who can enjoy their company and provide age-appropriate support, rather than someone who was perpetually dealing with crisis situations created by their aunt's behavior. The peace and stability that came from removing Jessica's drama and demands from my daily life has also allowed me to focus on my own health and retirement planning in ways that had been impossible when I was constantly managing financial crises and emotional manipulation. I've been able to establish realistic budgets, make prudent investment decisions, and plan for my own future care needs without the constant uncertainty about unexpected demands for emergency financial assistance. The business I built over decades of hard work is now positioned to continue supporting the family members who have demonstrated gratitude, responsibility, and mutual respect, rather than being gradually consumed by someone who viewed my success as an unlimited resource for Funding. Irresponsible lifestyle choices. Michael has shown interest in eventually taking over some aspects of the accounting practice. And knowing that my professional legacy will be continued by someone who shares my values has been deeply satisfying. The extended family and friend relationships that had been strained by years of drama and conflict around Jessica's behavior have also improved, as people have realized that they no longer need to navigate the complex dynamics created by her manipulation and entitlement. Family gatherings are more relaxed and enjoyable when everyone doesn't have to worry about managing Jessica's reactions to perceived slights or her demands for special treatment and financial support. Looking back on 32 years of parenting, Jessica, I can see that my mistake wasn't loving her too much, but rather confusing enabling with love and failing to establish boundaries that would have forced her to develop empathy, gratitude, and personal responsibility. By constantly rescuing her from the consequences of her choices and accepting emotional manipulation as normal behavior, I created a dynamic that was ultimately harmful to everyone involved. The question of whether I was wrong to tell my daughter she wasn't getting a penny has been answered through the peace and stability that followed that difficult conversation. While the decision was painful and has cost me a relationship with one of my children, it was necessary to protect the well-being of family members who deserved better treatment and to ensure that Myla Gacy would continue to reflect values of gratitude, responsibility, and mutual respect. The inheritance that Jessica expected to receive is now secured for Michael's family, where it will be used responsibly and appreciated appropriately, and where it will continue to support values and relationships that honor the decades of hard work that created the wealth in the first place. The contrast between how different children approach family relationships and financial responsibility has been a painful but important lesson about the difference between entitlement and gratitude, and between love that enables harmful behavior and love that maintains important boundaries and consequences. Today, at 67 years old, I'm more at peace with my family relationships than I've been in decades. Not because all my children are financially successful or perfectly behaved, but because the family members who remain in my life share values of mutual respect, gratitude, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The absence of constant drama, manipulation, and financial crisis has allowed authentic love and support to flourish in ways that had been impossible when I was enabling Jessica's destructive behavior. Patterns. I am not wrong for telling my daughter she's not getting a penny, because inheritance is not a right that children automatically deserve regardless of their behavior, but rather a privilege that reflects a parent's assessment of which family members are most likely to honor family values and use resources wisely. Jessica's decades of manipulation, cruelty, and entitlement demonstrated that she viewed family relationships as opportunities for exploitation rather than bonds of love and mutual support. And protecting my estate from continued abuse was both necessary and appropriate. The decision has protected Michael's family from ongoing financial and emotional abuse, secured my own retirement and healthcare needs, and ensured that the wealth I built through decades of hard work will continue to support family members who demonstrate the values of gratitude, responsibility, and a mutual respect that I hope to pass on to future generations. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal comes at the cost of a relationship that might never be repaired. If you've made it through this long story, I hope it provides insight into the complex decisions parents sometimes have to make about adult children who have become harmful to family relationships, and the importance of distinguishing between supporting children who are genuinely struggling and enabling children who have become manipulative and cruel. Not all family relationships can or should be preserved at any cost. And sometimes protecting the family members who demonstrate love and respect requires making difficult decisions about those who have chosen entitlement and manipulation over genuine relationship building. The daughter who expected to inherit my estate without showing gratitude, respect, or basic human decency toward her family has learned that actions have consequences, even in family relationships, and that inheritance is earned through demonstrated character rather than genetic connection alone. The penny she's not getting will instead go to family members who understand that love, gratitude, and mutual support are the foundations of healthy family relationships, and who will continue the values and legacy that I worked my entire adult life to build and maintain.